Hi, everyone. I want to welcome you on behalf of the Rockefeller Institute of Government. My name is Laura Rabinow. I'm the Deputy Director of Research here at Rockefeller and the Director of the Center for Law and Policy Solutions Internship Program. The CLPS internship is really designed for undergraduate students to give them their first hands-on policy research experience. Each semester, the interns work closely with their instructor, gaining professional experience and development opportunities, networking, and collecting and analyzing data for their own original research. This semester, the cohort of interns collected data and did their research on early childhood education, specifically state universal pre-K programs. At the end of each semester, it culminates in the presentation of the research that the internship cohort does. That's why we're all here today. So without further ado, I want to welcome them up to begin their presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Welcome everyone today to our presentation. We are the Center for Law and Policy Solutions Internship Program under the Rockefeller Institute of Government. And today we are going to be discussing state universal pre-K programs. My name is Teuta Muyai, and I am a senior at the University at Albany, and I study public policy and management. And now if my cohort wants to introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Manal Rosaj. I go to Albany. I study political science and psychology.
My name is Max Berman. I'm a senior at SUNY Albany, and I major in political science.
Hi, my name is Kayla Rankin. I'm a junior at Albany, and I double major in political science and sociology.
All right, thank you. So today for our presentation, we're going to do a quick introduction of what early childhood education is. Then we're going to jump into our case studies, which are the 3 states we studied throughout the semester. Then we're going to do an analysis of the different case studies and the benefits and the challenges of each program. And then we're just going to wrap it up with a quick conclusion of our research. Okay, so early childhood education is basically a practice of placing children aged birth to 8 years old in educational settings, whether informal or formal, using a curriculum meant to enrich the development of their abilities, using specialized activities and experiences specifically engineered for this age group. Pre-kindergarten is a form of early childhood education inherently in that it does exactly that. It places these students in these programs. And so for the purpose of our research, we used a particular definition of universal. So universal meaning that the programs are available to all families regardless of extenuating factors, such as like income. And as well as that, it's also universal in the sense that each district within the state offers a pre-K program. So not only is it available to families disregarding like income, but it's also available in the sense that it's there and families have the opportunity to be in these pre-K programs. A small difference between early education and pre-K is that state programs are specifically targeted to the age group of 3 to 4, whereas early childhood education in general is larger in that it targets children aged birth to 8 years old. We've also included Head Start in our analysis to act as a comparison point. Head Start is a form of a means-tested program. And what that means is that this is a test determining whether a family is eligible to receive benefits or additional payments by the government, from the government. And so there's no universal criteria for a means-tested program, but there is specific criteria for Head Start. And that criteria is the family must have an income below the poverty guidelines. There are, of course, exceptions where if the family is homeless or if the child is in the foster system. So the features of the Head Start program, there is the Head Start preschool, which is aged 3 to 5 years old. There's early Head Start, which is birth to 3 years old. The facilities are center-based or home-based. And then the mission is for eligible children and families to receive high-quality services in safe and healthy settings that prepare children for school and life. So Head Start, the main differences between Head Start and state programs is that there's an option for children birth to 3 years old, as well as Head Start is specifically targeted towards families with low income, whereas universal programs are offered to all families regardless of income. Now let's take a quick step back, and I will pass it to Manal to explain to us the history of early childhood education and the development of research for ECE in the 20th century.
My bad. As my colleague mentions, there are some of the programs and acts and case studies that we all have collectively looked at in order to understand more about early childhood care and to gather more information for our own research. Starting with Lithium Act, also known as the Lithium Act of 1940, it has done a variety of programs, and it was targeting a variety of issues. But one of the issues that it also contains was the early childhood programs. And it was seen as a temporary program due to World War II emergency measurements. And it was aimed to serve age 0 to 12 years old. And it was particularly targeting low-income families with disadvantages for the case of the war. It was mainly targeted toward women that was contributing to the production efforts of the war, and it was also spread into 3 to spend $1 billion in 2012 dollars if we're comparing. They were all federally aimed. The fundings were available to maintain teacher payments, handle all expenses to the centers, all 600 of them. And so, as I mentioned, it targets low-income families and to increase parental employment and to also give more time for family to participate in those companies or factories. And so it was children to the ratio that they had in classrooms were 10 to 1, so 10 students per 1 teacher. It also was operated about 12 hours a day and 6 days a week, and the amount of time can also expand to how much longer the student needed the attention or the family were able to work at the time. It allowed women to work and provide better life for their families. It encouraged maternal employment long after the program was terminated, and it has increased a variety of diverse group of women to be able to go to the workforce. So in the long term, it improved labor market. It had a great participation for programs, and it was intentive to make children more likely to work, earn more, and receive cash assistance, and not receive cash assistance later on in their adulthood. The program was also benefited the disadvantaged while having little to no impact on the rich. Ultimately, the wealth of the family had grew early on in life, and and education and health got better throughout time due to that program. Then we have the Prairie Project. The Prairie Project also was as the high scope experiment. And this was a scientific experiment that identified both short and long-term effects on early childhood education and the high quality of preschool. They also targeted low-income students and families, mostly the disadvantaged that weren't able to continue on without any benefits. It also was operated, the hours of operated was half day or 2 hours and a half normally each day. It's operated 6 days a week as well. And the researchers had about 123 low-income students, particularly African-American students, children, that were at high risk of school failure at the age of 3 to 4. They looked at them throughout throughout ages of 3, 11, 14, 15, 19, and 27. And every time they were to collect data, they wanted to see the long effect of early education on those groups. The students that were in that group, the students that were in the group of Prairie Project were found to have outperformed the one that were in controlled group. They had high scores of testing, graduating high school, had basic achievements in life, and also did really high on their high score, on their IQ score, and were able to earn 20K and more during their adult life. Teachers at the high scope education use the model of the 2.5 hours of classroom, and they did this daily to make sure that they had followed the model and gave the right information and program to the children that were in the group. Teachers received intensively amount of development that were helping them to continue the model and give better education for the kids. And overall, the students that were in the program showed high performance of graduating, going to continuing their education, having to do better at their work, and the program itself had impact early childhood education because we do have long data to analyze. Then we have Hester, and as my colleague mentioned before, this program is nationally the largest early intervention prevention program at low-risk income preschoolers in the United States. And the program was launched in 1965 as part of War on Poverty. And its goal was to help children of low-income family to be able to had to perform better at school in general. The age were birth to 5 and then 3 to 5 years old. They serve family from all, so there was no limit to who can be in the program as long as they met the requirements, was low income and the age of the children. Hester is required to have a certain number of slots for preschoolers for special need education, and it's requirement for the students that to have their parental to be involved in at least their policy council meetings and volunteering in the classroom. So the requirements for each parents in this program. preschooler enrolled in Head Start can attend either half day or full day. So it's totally optional to the parents that are enrolled in Head Start to choose which one that meets their schedule. And Head Start is one of the programs, federal programs that we have in all 50 states. Also, it's contributed to offering different kinds of services modeled based on what community it needs. Many Head Start programs are based in centers and child care and institution schools, and other parts are home-based services and routine visits for children that are part of the program. Head Start's teachers are and they do daily checks and visits to make sure that the kids in program are performing better in life. They are meeting the requirements to stay in the program, and that everything is going according to the model. Teachers and size of the group is maximum to one teacher to 6 students per class or per caretaker. And Head Start performs standards stress how important it is to treat children respectfully regarding of their background, race, and ethnicity. Head Start has gave and known for their given an opportunity for anyone and any with any circumstances. Then we have the opportunity. It started in 1972 at North Carolina Chapel Hill, and it was a single randomized control trial. It provided educational child care and high quality of education. The preschoolers were also low-income students with also low-income family of ages 0 to 5 years old. This program tested about 120 families with African-American children. The families were put into 2 groups to see the outcome in the long term for people that were in control group and the people that were part of the project. The children had full day care as well, and the preschooler were available all year with low teacher to children ratio of 1 teacher per 3 students, and or either 1 teacher per 6 students. It mainly affected or it mainly was due to the fact that they believed that low ratio of students to teacher had a greatly impacts on the way the students perceive early education, but also the outcome of the one-on-one attention. So overall, the group that attended the project had better terms of graduating high school and other higher education, their income and type of job that they choose as an adult, and also it was clear there was no clear patterns about whether their success has part of being part of the preschoolers at first, but they had seen that there's other positive outcomes coming from them being in that program. The Tennessee Star Project also had randomized an experiment of 2 groups, but they were targeting mainly the size of the class. They believed that in order to have an effective child education that can have a long impact on students, the ratio should be about 15 students to per teacher or even lower. That the legislature allowed the 4-year study to compare results from kindergarten, first grades, third grade, and also the age of 13 to 17, the classrooms of 13 to 17 students. They wanted to compare the size of class to they wanted to compare the size of class to their outcome of scores and potentially anything they do later on in life. The teachers were accommodated and hired to particularly follow this model and see how to follow and develop a better education for the kids. They found out that 8 out of the 2 groups, 80 of the schools that were tested in or were participating in that experiment had better reading and testing and math testing score than the other groups. The skills they were using were standards, and curriculum was based examination. The law required any teacher in that was participating in that program to be trained specifically to the model of the Prairie Project, the STAR project, and 15 of them were consistently taught different developments to see if teachers were to have a different way or different standards in teaching, how would that also impact lower the amount of the students in class. The research found that reducing the average class size from 23 students to 15 raised the performance of test scores and about 0.2 standard deviation. And the Project STAR was established a project challenge to which they cut the size of the class to 17 on 17 poorest districts in Tennessee, and that was all funded by the program, and it was about $5 million to completely reduce the amount of students in class. After 4 years, it was obvious that the smaller size of class had improved early learning, and it was seen that the minority children achieved higher quality and doubled their score due to the fact of the class size. Lastly, we have the Boston Lottery. They wanted to see the impact of high quality of education and long-term and short-term implication. So the Boston Public School and Universal Public Preschool in the program did the first randomized lottery for students so they can study them for long term. And the outcomes of all the children that were randomized or were selected is randomly selected were studied in the long term to see the impact of the early education. Attending the Boston Public School increased the likelihood of school graduation and enrolling in college after. And the study overall had learned or analyzed that preschool had limited short-term effect on test studies, but has big impact on school conduct. And the research suggests that school can lead to long-term education, attempting benefits through improved behavior. So overall, it was across the demographic of where they are as students, whether it's universal preschool or not, and all the benefits that they can have as pupils. And now I will give it to my colleague, Kayla, to tell us more about the case study.
So I will be starting us off with the case study, starting with Oklahoma. So in 1980, the Early Childhood 4-year-old program was created in Oklahoma. It was created as a pilot program to test whether or not they wanted preschools to be a fully instated program in all the school districts. In 1990, the program received statewide funding, but it was limited to 4-year-olds who were eligible for the federal Head Start program. And in 1998, Oklahoma became the second state to provide free preschools for all 4-year-olds, with 100% of all school districts providing it. So I know this story may seem pretty straight cut, but there was a lot going on behind the scenes. So in the first program in 1980, there was a lot going on. So schools would get the same amount of funding, whether they had a full day program or a half day program. So schools began serving 2 half day programs and getting double the money from the state. They would enroll 5-year-olds, and when they didn't have enough 5-year-olds to fill classes, they would enroll 4-year-olds. And a senior legislator at the time, Joe Edens, he did not like that. And he made it his goal to kind of close the program and get the 4-year-olds out of school because he didn't see the benefit in it. After being talked to by some lobbyists, he understood that having 4-year-olds in school was way better, and that was better for the long run because it benefited them. There was a lot of benefits being shown, as Manal showed us, with all the past research projects. And so he changed his bill to provide state funding for all 4-year-olds. So thank you to Joe Edens, all 4-year-olds in Oklahoma. But these are the requirements of Oklahoma programs. So they have small class sizes, a 10-to-1 ratio, which has been proven in the Tennessee STAR project to be most effective. Lead teachers are required to have both a bachelor's and be certified in early childhood education. Each program must run for 2.5 hours per day, and they run 5 days a week. And the program is specifically for 4-year-olds, although recently in 2017, they began allowing 3-year-olds to join. Administration, 100% of all school districts do provide the program. There's full day and half day programs, so that didn't change from 1980. And the standards for the program are set by the Oklahoma Standards for Accreditation and the Oklahoma Academic Standards. So the standards for accreditation, it's kind of like, you know how the Regents sets like scores, like, okay, by the time you finish this grade, you should be able to know this, 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 and this, and you should know this, 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 and this. That's what the Oklahoma Accreditation Standards does. It makes sure that by the time your kid like finishes pre-K, finishes kindergarten, they know a certain set of things. And the academic standards kind of ties it all together to make sure that what they're learning is useful and it's being built upon as they go through the grades. So as for funding, Oklahoma spends a lot of money on pre-K. They spend over close to $200 million. In the 2019-2020 school year, they spent $4,696 per student. We also included the Head Start funding because Head Start is it's a national pre-K program, and we wanted to use it as comparison because we can't talk about pre-K without talking about Head Start because it does serve a number of students in those communities. So they also spend about the same amount, $4,609 per student, and they are serving a smaller group of students. So that's a pretty great number. And then we included K through 12 spending as well to show whether or not this care towards students is being carried through the school years. And for Oklahoma, it is. It's estimated $5,000 per student. So it's not too far off in numbers. As for access in 2019 to 2020, 70% of 4-year-olds and 5% of 3-year-olds were enrolled. For Head Start, those numbers were 10% of 4-year-olds and 15% of 3-year-olds. As for impact, we've seen that people who use the early childhood education program in Oklahoma are 6% more likely to enroll in honors courses, 26% less likely to have been held back a grade. They have 8% gain in their third grade reading scores and a 14% gain in their math scores. So quick summary, small class sizes, bachelor's and early childhood education certification. 100% of the school districts serve pre-K, offer pre-K programs. They spend close to $5,000 per student, and 70% of 4-year-olds are enrolled. Yeah. So overall, Oklahoma has a pretty great program with 100% of all school districts participating in it. They have great funding, high access, and they've shown high impacts on their retention rates. But enough about Oklahoma. Let's talk about Florida. So I will pass it on to Tina.
Thank you. All right, so jumping into Florida. Before Florida had UPK, they already had some form of pre-K. The first being Florida First Start, and the second being the pre-kindergarten early intervention program. And so a little about these programs. Florida First Start was serving children from birth to 3 years old, while PKEI was serving 3 to 4 years old. Florida First Start was home visitation, and PKEI was full-day centralized programs. And both programs served the same population, which was students high risk for developmental disabilities or delays. So inherently, because they're serving a particular population, they were not universal. So in 1999, the state released a single system report asking for a coherent and coordinated system. And what this would do is synchronize the quality, content, and overall structure of how pre-K looked in Florida. And this was done through merging the two programs using the School Readiness Act. This act did not inherently make the programs universal, though. And so Florida voters were not satisfied that they didn't have a universal program. And so they lobbied, and that's how universal pre-K was created. In January of 2005, the Voluntary Pre-Kindergarten Program Act was established. So for the requirements, there are 3 separate programs under the umbrella of Florida Universal Pre-K. The first being the school year program, the second is the summer program, and the third is the specialized instructional services program. This third program is inherently different in terms of its requirements. So it's not done in a traditional classroom setting. It serves 4-year-olds specifically with special needs, and each student has their own individualized educational plan given to them by the local school district. So for the school year program, it has 540 instructional hours, whereas the summer program is 300 hours. And a note about that, while it seems like the school year program offers more hours, comparatively speaking, the school year program is 10 months long, where the summer program is 2 months long. And so when you kind of proportion that out, there's definitely more face time with the students in the summer program. The school year program has 20 or fewer students per classroom, while the summer program is 12 or fewer students. There is a 20-to-1 student to teacher ratio in the school year program, where there's a 12-to-1 student teacher ratio in the summer program. To teach in the school year program, you have to have a child development associate's degree, whereas to teach in the summer program, you need a bachelor's degree in any field. And both programs serve specifically 4-year-olds. So administration, there are over 6,000 private daycares, public care centers, including public schools and religious affiliated providers. In 2012, it was estimated there are 64% of centers are private, so the vast majority. 19% are public centers, and 16% are faith-based. So each facility can create their own policies and procedures, which does inherently make each experience unique. But they must all follow the state-mandated UPK guidelines, which are listed out in the contracts that they sign, which are the voluntary pre-K provider contracts. These agreements is how faculties receive funding from the states when they agree to follow all the mandated guidelines. These facilities work under the Early Learning Coalition, and what this is an office under the state government, and there's an office for the Early Learning Coalition in each school district. So These offices oversee each facility within each district. So for funding in 2004, before UPK was passed, naturally the state was spending $0 total on UPK, along with $0 per pupil in terms of funding. But comparatively speaking, Head Start was spending $7,228 per pupil in funding, and the state was spending estimated $3,500 per pupil regarding K through 12 spending. In 2020, the state was spending over $400 million total for UPK, and per pupil, that was $2,401. Head Start also increased their funding to $9,612 per pupil, and the K through 12 funding was also increased to about $4,500 per pupil. Florida spends less per pupil than the other two states. And this current rate is actually a decrease from a high of $3,224 per pupil in 2008. Okay, so for access, again, in 2004, before there was a UPK program, the state was serving 0% of students, so 0 students total. Head Start was serving 10% of all 4-year-olds in the state, as well as 6% of all 3-year-olds. And so that was about 33,000 students total. In 2020, the state was serving 72% of all 4-year-olds and 0% of all 3-year-olds because they don't serve 3-year-olds. And that was about 167,000 students total. Head Start was serving, they had a decrease and they're serving 7% of all 4-year-olds, but their 3-year-olds stayed the same at 6%. Being about 32,000 students total. Enrollment has also progressively decreased from a high of 80% of all 4-year-olds in 2014 to, as I said, 72% in 2020. So impacts regarding retention in the short term, retention rates were lower amongst Florida students, comparing students who were in a pre-K program to students who were not in a pre-K program. And this was specifically the transition from kindergarten to first grade. So there was an impact that pre-K was having on the students. Retention in the long term, retention rates actually were the same for grades beyond first grade. So regardless of whether a student was in pre-K or not in pre-K, retention rates became the same. Math and reading scores amongst third graders, there was no statistically significant difference in the scores comparatively between students who were in universal pre-K and students who were not in universal pre-K. But an important note, early childhood education research actually indicates this. This is a well-known fact that academic achievement does kind of wear off after the third grade. And so, but what you will find is that skill sets that these children acquired during pre-K actually come up later in life through non-cognitive skills, such as learning habits, responsibility, and skills such as those. Oh, okay.
That's pretty
So
bad.
weird.
There we go.
Okay.
There we go.
So to summarize Florida, there are 3 separate programs, each with their own requirements. There are 6,000 different facilities, and each operate under the Early Coalition office in their district. The funding is just over $400 million for 2020, as well as per pupil, it was $2,401 in 2020. They serve 72% of all 4-year-olds and 0% of all 3-year-olds, equaling 167,000 students. So Florida has the largest universal pre-K program in terms of serving the vast majority of age-appropriate children in the state, as well as the amount of officially recognized voluntary pre-K sites they have. But they also have the lowest quality among the case studies. And this is due to lack of funding, and it's shown through only short-term impacts on retention rates. And now I'll pass it off to Max to tell us about Vermont.
All right. So looking at Vermont, Historically, in 2014, the General Assembly, the state legislature, passed Act 166, which established a statewide universal pre-K program. And it also passed an Act 11 study to measure the impacts of the program. And in 2009, that study was published before the State House. Looking at the requirements in Vermont, Vermont serves 3- and 4-year-olds in the state, as well as 5-year-olds not previously enrolled in a program. In terms of student to teacher ratio, it is 20-1 or less, as well as class size is 20 or less. Instructional hours, there are 350 mandatory instructional hours, and teachers are required to have a bachelor's degree in early childhood education, although there's an exception for private school teachers who are allowed to have an associate's degree in that field. Looking at administration, the Vermont program is broken into 2 systems. The public program, which is your standard public pre-K program, it's available to all 3- and 4-year-olds and some 5-year-olds in Vermont. And it has at least 10 hours a week and up to 35 weeks a year of education. The private program is a voucher system in which students that are already accepted into a preschool program can be reimbursed for the tuition by the state for up to 10 hours a week and up to 35 weeks a year. In terms of participation, 51% of students are in a public program, 49% in a private program, so they're both used quite a lot. In terms of funding, in 2020, Vermont spent $68,107,450 on pre-K. In 2014, before universal pre-K was introduced, the state was spending $6,507 per student, but by 2020, that rose to $7,925. In Head Start funding, the state receives $15,234,534 from the federal government, which is a substantially large $17,694 per student. That's more than most of the other states, but that could be due to the fact that small states, as well as DC, tend to have more per pupil funding from Head Start. And in state K-12 funding, you can see the state spends $17,108 per student, which is over double the pre-K spending, but that's pretty standard. In terms of access, in 2014, again, the last year before universal pre-K was introduced, 39% of 3-year-olds in Vermont were enrolled, as well as 57% of 4-year-olds. By 2017, that rose to 60% of 3-year-olds and 75% of 4-year-olds. And in 2019 to 20, those numbers were largely the same, 59% of 3-year-olds and 76% of 4-year-olds, which was 8,594 total students. And there are 861 students in Head Start. In terms of impacts, retention rates have stayed pretty consistent at around 2%, both before and after the program. And in terms of testing scores, there aren't many years of data, but the first year that the universal pre-K cohort was eligible to take standardized exams was 2019. And there was a modest impact on the test scores, but not too large. In 2020, there were no tests because of the pandemic. And in 2021, the scores actually dropped, but that could be attributed to pandemic-related factors. So generally, we need more years of data to better understand the impact of universal pre-K on test scores in Vermont. So in summary, the Vermont program allows 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds and some 5-year-olds. Teachers are required to have a degree in early childhood education. Both programs have at least 350 instructional hours paid for by the government. Total pre-K spending is over $68 million or $7,935 per student. That's a roughly $1,500 per student increase since the introduction of universal pre-K. And there are 8,594 students in the program, with majorities of both 3- and 4-year-olds enrolled. So overall, Vermont has the highest participated universal pre-K program. As I said, majorities of both 3- and 4-year-olds are in. The positive potential for the program has not been seen yet in data, but it's somewhat limited. And it is the most endowed per student of the states that we measured, and is the only system that has a voucher program. And I'll hand things over to Kayla to begin the analysis.
So we measured each state based on accessibility, funding, impact, and the quality. So things to note for the quality, we use the benchmarks used by the National Institute of Early Education Research, and we use the NIEER because they are an organization that specializes in studying early childhood education, and they release a a yearbook of the preschool in each state, where they kind of analyze the program and the impacts that it's having. And for the impact, where we measured the retention rate in third grade reading and math scores, it was hard for us to use long-term impacts because Vermont is a fairly new program, and we wanted something that we could compare all 3 programs with across the board. So we did use third grade reading and math scores. I know Taylor mentioned that those effects do kind of fall off after third grade and that they show up later on in life. So hopefully that is one of the questions for further research, in a couple of years, where will Vermont be? Where will Oklahoma and where will Florida be? So we have a lovely chart, and it has a lot of information on it. So we have DC, Vermont, Wisconsin, Florida, Oklahoma, and Georgia. Now there are some states that we did not mention on there, and that is because they do have pre-K programs. However, by our definition, they are not universal pre-K programs. So for DC, it does have a pre-K program. However, DC is not a state, so it's not considered a state universal pre-K program. Wisconsin, certain school districts have pre-K programs, but every single school district does not have it. And the same can be said for Georgia. So we were focusing solely on Vermont, Florida, and Oklahoma. So as you can see, Vermont has the highest enrollment for 4-year-olds, and they also have the highest funding per student, as well as for UPK and Head Start, and they rank second in access. So they basically wipe us out across the board. Oklahoma has the lowest access. However, they have the second highest funding per student for UPK and the lowest funding for Head Start. And they're ranked 5th in access. And there's Florida kind of in the middle with 72% of enrollment and with $9,612 for funding in Head Start. So these are the benchmarks that the National Institute of Early Childhood Education Research uses. Early learning and development standards, curriculum support, teacher degree, teacher specialized training, assistant teacher degree, staff professional development, maximum class size, staff to child ratio, screenings and referrals, and continuous quality improvement systems. So a lot of these benchmarks are things that we mentioned in our background research that have been proven to kind of aid in a successful program. So here we have Oklahoma coming out on top with 9 out of 10 benchmarks met. The only benchmark that they are missing is the assistant teaching degree. Next, we have Florida. They only met 2 benchmarks, which were the early learning and development standards and the maximum class size. And next is Vermont with 7 out of 10, and they are missing the assistant teaching degree, staff professional development, and screenings and referrals.
And comparatively looking at impact, we could see varying degrees of success. So in Oklahoma, students perform much better on standardized exams, and there's modest improvements of reaching honors courses, things like that. There's also been a decrease in students being held back, which is, obviously that's a good thing. In Florida, there was not that increase seen in test scores. Then there was an improvement in retention rates, but that eventually wore off over time. And in Vermont, we have not seen improvement in either retention rates or test scores. But again, we don't have many years of data. There are encouraging signs in Vermont, however, as explained before, the enrollment has boomed in the state, as well as attendance rates, and school quality measured by the state has improved as well, as measured by the Act 11 study. So moving on to our conclusion section. So in examining these 3 universal pre-K programs, we could see that Oklahoma showed significant long-term benefits, while Florida's did not. Vermont also is yet to show these benefits, but it is comparatively much newer. There are not as many years of data, so it's a little bit difficult to compare it with the other 2. In terms of access and funding, Vermont leads the way, followed by Oklahoma and then Florida, and Oklahoma makes the most quality benchmarks. So some key differences include that Oklahoma has the strictest requirements. Florida's program was exceptionally large in the other 2, And Vermont had much more funding per student, followed by Oklahoma, which also had much more funding than Florida. And just a way to bear this out is that Florida had over 5 times as much total funding as Vermont, but Vermont had over 2.5 times as much funding per student. And then moving on, our questions for further research. So what are the relative impacts of having a universal state pre-K program versus more targeted means tested programs like Head Start? And how should New York continue expanding its pre-K program? And what aspects of programs were most causally linked to their positive impacts? And then we'll open the floor to questions.
The Vermont voucher program, are you aware if that's a unique model or other states share that?
The voucher program? Well, so some states have versions of the voucher program, but none of them are universal pre-K programs, which is what makes the Vermont voucher program distinctive from the other two, is that it has that while the other two don't, and the other 47 states don't have a universal program.
What seems like a lack of funding on Florida side, what was driving the push to just have so much participation in this program?
Well, for Florida specifically, it's a very large state. And so considering that it already had a program targeted specifically for a particular population, it makes sense that Florida voters, the vast majority who don't fall into this bracket, would also want the opportunity to place their children into a pre-K program. And so that's kind of how the universal program was born.
Can you go back to your slide, that last slide? Yeah. Those are my interests too. So, good job. I'm on a school board in New York, and we've had some real practical concerns about UPK beyond the state issues. And it gets really, as you kind of alluded to, it gets very difficult and political, and we've had to deal with a lot of dollar concerns, money concerns. To what extent will the school district have to contribute if state and federal dollars dry up? As you know, here in New York, all this new money came in for UPK, and we're one of those school districts that did not have a UPK program. And I always kind of said, we should, and we ended up putting one in place, but then there's been a lot of give and take, a lot of back and forth. It's been not an easy installation. The staffing of those UPK programs has been difficult here in New York because of union concerns. The unions, if you want to put your UPK program in the school district or in the school building, they want to make sure that the staff in that building are unionized. But there was an opportunity to partner with a community-based organization outside of the school. We were able to do that. They're not a union shop, they're just a private, and that complicated our world a little bit, and we're still gonna have to deal with that at some point in time. The facility itself that we are using for the pre-K program, and I don't know to what extent you have looked at facility use, but it's like a pole barn, let's just put it that way, it's okay, and it works, but it's not a luxurious setting for a UPK program. We have had some last minute policy changes that have come out of New York that have made it, we've had to make some pretty drastic adjustments for that. And if there is a kid who comes through who has some special needs, I don't think we're really prepared to deal with that. So I'm sort of bringing all that up to tell you, as you look at New York, there's a lot of practical things. I'm a big advocate for UPK, but at the practical side, there's a lot of things they have to work through to make this work here in this state. I don't know if I'm sure those were issues in those other states as well, but it seems like it's very complicated here. One more thing I would add, when you talk about what aspects of the program are most causally linked, you talk about testing in grades 3, and and to what extent has there been retention and things like that. My experience, just observing, I think there's some advantages to UPK or early childhood education, probably anecdotal, but I'm thinking of socialization skills, social and emotional, being able to center on your social and emotional health, language skills, huge, organization, sharing, time management, all these things that I think kids pick up a lot of things at that age that are not tested, but they show up at school, let's say kindergarten or first grade. When I've seen kids who arrive at school at first grade and they've been to a early childhood program or a pre-K program, I can kind of tell. There is something about their preparedness that's a little different than a child who's coming straight out of the home. I think it does kind of even out when you get to that third grade or something like that, but there's some advantages here that you can't test for, but I think they're there.
You're absolutely correct. Actually, we looked at New York as a state, and they call it the universal pre-K, but it's only if you allowed it to be in your district. So it's totally completely voluntarily to be part of the program. So that's why it's definitely not universal, because when we're talking about universal, we're talking about the whole state, being part of that program. But you're absolutely correct. Actually, New York met the benchmarks as 7 out of 10, and one of them was the teaching requirements and the places or the centers that they are putting the kids in. And so they didn't meet that, but they still have high benchmark, but it's not really universal, so it doesn't really, I wouldn't say it really counts, but
It seems
yeah.
like New York would say they're universal because anybody can do
Correct.
this.
Correct.
But truth be that not every school district has the capability to make that.
I believe only 5 districts.
Or about 200 and some districts have some sort of a
Exactly.
pre-K program.
Yeah, well, or preschool programs, yes.
Well, I'm sure that Albany, just like in Georgia and just like in Wisconsin, they probably like to say they have a universal pre-K program because it sounds really good. But that's the difference that we've described here is it's all about implementation. Some states actually have one, and some states don't. And the difficulty in New York is similar to let's say Florida, because it is a large state, very different. Just like the panhandle of Florida is very different from Miami, very different from Central Florida. New York, the Finger Lakes are incredibly different from Western New York, which is incredibly different from downstate New York, Westchester, Long Island. But as we saw in Florida, it's possible to have these programs. And as we saw in Oklahoma and Vermont, a lot of it comes down to being well funded. And so I think that Albany would be well served to both fund it better than Florida did and look at how Florida managed a large system. So I don't think it's impossible. I think it all comes down to having enough funding.
So when you say Albany, you mean New York?
Yes, Albany, New York, not Albany, Georgia.
No, I'm saying, but you're referring.
Yes, the state of New York.
You're referring to the state of New York.
Yes.
Which is different than the city of Albany.
Right. Yes, the state of, yes.
Yes.
I meant the capital. Yes.
If you guys can meet with Governor Hochul tomorrow, what would be your primary recommendations as the state looks to expand the CPK program?
Definitely as we learned from the background section, a lot of those projects and acts or programs, we're looking at the size of the classroom, the requirements for teachers to teach. So definitely looking into expanding the universal pre-K in New York. We should really intensively care for the teachers that we are putting in those programs, but also the size of the classes.
Do you guys look at all about legislation in other states? I mean, is this a growing trend? Do you have a sense of whether other states are on the verge of adopting UPK?
Well, we can see that, in Wisconsin, I think is a good example for this because Wisconsin has what is, essentially in districts, there are universal pre-K programs, and in some districts, there's no program. But there has been an increase in enrollment rates in pre-K, which probably leads to the point that Wisconsin's getting closer to almost all of these districts having that. So I think there's some momentum for this, but again, a lot of times it comes down to these funding issues and these state legislative battles. And so no state has passed a program since Vermont that we consider to be universal pre-K, and that was 2014. So in the last 8 years, there hasn't been a program like this, but the ideas are floating around.
Can you go back to the slide that has all of the districts, DC, Wisconsin? Does the percent enrollment 4-year-olds, does that mean that in Oklahoma, because I know you had said that it was offered to everyone, does that mean that 70% of 4-year-olds are taking advantage of it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
When you say that, so the states you looked at have universal programs and New York State doesn't, would you say that those states mandate to their school districts to provide a program?
In Florida, Vermont, and Oklahoma, yes, but not in Wisconsin, DC, and well, not in Wisconsin and Georgia.
And
So,
you can go.
it's mandatory to have the program, but it's not mandatory to enroll in the program.
Right.
So it's completely optional for the students.
And as I mentioned, there are districts in New York State that does offer the program, but there has to be a requirement met every year for that program to be standards in their districts.
Did you get any sense that when this new federal dollars came in, that there was a big bump in the number of school districts that took advantage of that money to start a new program?
I'm sorry, say that again?
There was new federal money that came in, this kind of post-pandemic money. I don't know what it was attached to, but a whole bunch of it came in. That's what caused us to do it, where we said, all right, we got the opportunity to enroll X number of students into a UP Prairie Project. We could find a way to make it happen. I got the impression that there were a lot of districts that would probably do likewise and take advantage of it. I don't know. I don't know beyond our borders who else would have done it. And I'm just wondering if you had, in your research, had found that there was a big bump in New York because of federal funding.
Well, that's mostly beyond the scope of our research. We've largely focused on like up to 2020, and then things kind of got a little due to the pandemic. Things got a little shaky, so the numbers are a little,
They're still out there to, for us to research for further.
Chapter 2.
Chapter 2, correct. You are absolutely right.
Any more questions?
Quick one. So since you did such an intensive look at these 3 states and New York is in this process of ramping up to potentially a true universal pre-K program, what should we know about the difficulties of this sort of ramp up and expansion to more and more districts? Are there things you learned that New York could pay attention to, be proactive about?
Something that I learned that I think might be a problem is, teachers are required to have a bachelor's and early childhood education certification, but they're also paid the same amount as like K through 12 teachers. So I don't know, it might have to be a trade-off situation, like less certification in order to get more teachers, or like having highly certified teachers, but we don't have enough to fill all the school districts.
All right, I want to just thank again all of our cohort. They did a wonderful job. Thank you all so much. And we look forward to seeing you all again next semester when we do this again. So come back anytime. Thank you all. Have a lovely day.